Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're healthy and safe. I'm Tony Tran with the Community Technical Assistance Center, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Wellness Self-Management for the COVID-19 Crisis, presented by Drs. Anthony Salerno from CTAC and the McSilver Institute, and Dr. Paul Margulies from the Center for Practice Innovations. So before we get started today, I want to take a moment to orient everyone to the Webex system so you know how to participate in today's event. So upon joining the webinar, you've been placed on mute to avoid any background noise. We've had a lot of participants lately, so sometimes we may experience technical difficulties. So if you could just check that you are muted, that would be great. And if you have any technical issues, you can just message me at the host, and I'll help you throughout the presentation. You'll also have the opportunity to submit questions for Q&A during today's presentation and use the chat box. You can click on the dialog bubble at the middle of your screen if you don't see it, and it should appear. And please chat to all panelists or the host so we can collect your questions. And we are very excited today to have with us Drs. Anthony Salerno and Paul Margulies. I will now pass it along to them to get started. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fong, and hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Wellness Self-Management for the COVID-19 Crisis webinar. I'm Paul Margulies from the Center for Practice Innovations, and joining me, of course, is Tony Salerno from the Community Technical Assistance Center of New York. Tony, you want to say hello?
Well, of course, you know, well, you and I haven't been doing these sorts of things together for quite a while, and I know that a number of folks were asking, where's the Tony and Paul show? And this is like one of those opportunities for us to work together. I'm really looking forward, and really just to welcome everyone. And we recognize how much people are struggling, and we hope that what we have to share with you would be a resource that's practical and useful for you. Paul, I think you're on mute, Paul. Paul, you need to unmute. Fong, are you able to unmute Dr. Margulies?
I'm trying to, and it's not working. So I don't know what's going on. Let's see.
This is a time when we all need to be a little patient. And even I'll be patient with Dr. Margulies, you know. He's getting on in years. It could be a challenge.
Paul, if you can see the little red microphone next to your name. I don't know if his internet connection is wobbly.
Paul, can you hear us? Can you nod your head if you hear us?
Paul, there should be a red button. I'm trying to unmute you, but it's not working. So let's see, unmute.
I think I'm being heard. I just think.
Yes, you sound fine, Tony.
Okay.
Thanks for your patience, everybody.
We should get this going in a minute or so.
Let's see. I don't know what's going on with Paul. I think his connection is a little.
All right, so maybe I can go in, and if you could work with Paul to see if we can get him back. Yeah. All right, so how do I have the ball now?
I will give it to you. All right.
All right, thank you. All right, terrific. Welcome, everyone. Thanks again for your patience. I guess we've all had to learn how to deal with this new technology, what's sometimes referred to as the new normal. Well, let me just share with you what we're going to try to do today. For some of you, you have some familiarity with wellness self-management curriculum that Paul and I worked on years ago. And my understanding is that there's a lot of folks who are still using parts of the workbook, the entire workbook. So we're going to really, we thought, and actually this is Dr. Margulies' idea. He called me up and said, you know, don't you think it might be useful and helpful if we were to create some resources that would be really helpful to folks out there who want to engage their clients and directly in exploring the impact of the impact of the COVID-19 on their emotional and physical well-being and strategies to cope, how they're handling the stress, all those sorts of things. Paul, are you on now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. I'm so sorry about that. I have no idea where I disappeared to. But if you can hear me now, I will carry on. And Tony, that was a great way to fill some time.
Well, Paul, I was telling them that this was really your idea.
I was listening to that.
Right, and I think that that's a really important thing, and we're hoping, of course, that this is really going to be practical and useful for all of you.
Absolutely. So let me carry on, and hopefully we won't lose me again. So here are our learning objectives, everybody. So by the time we're done with this hour or so, we're going to learn about the basics of wellness self-management, which forms the foundation for our new WSM COVID-19 lessons. You're going to become familiar with the 6 new lessons and how to use them. You'll understand what WSM COVID-19 can be provided. You'll understand that it can be provided remotely and also in person. And you're going to know how to organize the lessons, both individually and in groups. So we're going to start with a polling question. And the question is, are you familiar with the Wellness Self-Management Practice and Workbook? And I don't know if people have the poll to respond to.
Sorry, everyone, I opened the wrong poll. I am opening the poll now.
Okay.
1 second. All right, it should be open now. It should pop up on the right side of your screen on the bottom right. You can also chat into the chat box if you can't access the polling feature.
Yeah. Can folks see the poll?
All right, I will close it out now. We have over 50% response, so give it a few seconds and the results will appear.
Okay. And folks, I can't see the responses here. Perhaps you can read them out?
We'll be able to in about 5 seconds.
Oh, great.
It takes a bit for it to process and then wrap up. All right, you should be able to see them.
No, I don't see them.
I can
on the
see
right
it, Paul.
side.
Can you see them, Tony?
There you go.
Yes. So what we have is 131 folks said yes, but a very large number, 416, said no.
Okay.
And there's a large number of folks who, for them, this is a first, getting an initial awareness of what the wellness self-management is about, which is terrific. We came prepared for that.
And it's good to know. Okay, we have another question, and that is, if you're familiar, have you ever used the workbook? And you can actually respond to more than one answer. Yes individually, yes in groups, or no.
Just give you guys a moment.
All right, closing out now. Give it a few seconds. All right.
So it's a small number, Paul, who've used it individually, 25, a little more who've used it in groups. And again, there's a large number of folks who are really new to this. And we will keep that in mind as we go forward and sort of remind folks who've already had some familiarity with this approach.
Yep, good to know. Thank you, folks. So this is what the original Wellness Self-Management Workbook looks like. And I can mention that you can download this at no cost from the Center for Practice Innovation's website. A little bit of background. Tony and our colleague Andy Kleek, who's now at McSilva NYU, and I worked on this and developed this workbook really well over a decade ago now. And it's a curriculum-based program that's organized into a workbook. There are 57 lessons, and they're designed to support a person to better manage mental health and substance use difficulties. You can use it in groups or use it individually. And now, I can't believe, Tony, this was a decade ago. 10 years ago,
I know.
Wellness won a federal government SAMHSA Science of Service Award. Wow, a decade ago. And each lesson, as you'll see soon, follows a format. And the format's aligned with the principles of self-directed adult learning. Some more details. We've had, over the years, very widespread implementation across all sorts of clinical conditions and cultural populations and service settings. It's really has been used and is currently used really throughout New York State and beyond. Guided by the principles of shared decision-making and empowerment and self-direction and hope and recovery. The neat thing about this workbook and about the work we're going to talk about today is that there are these core competencies, which many folks are familiar with. Connecting and motivating skills, educational and cognitive behavioral skills, all of which are embedded within the workbook. So you don't need to take several years of training in each of these in order to provide the service. As long as you're following the workbook, it will really guide you through these core competencies. This is what our new lessons look like. This is the cover page for our new COVID-19 Crisis Wellness Self-Management lessons. There are 6 lessons, and I'm going to take a moment and walk you through each one. The first lesson is called Understanding the Coronavirus and COVID-19. It focuses on the virus, symptoms, and how to protect yourself. The second lesson is what is stress? Why is it important to understand our stress during this crisis? This one focuses on stress, learning why it's important to identify our worries and why this is especially important now. The third lesson is identifying your personal signs of stress during the COVID-19 crisis. This lesson focuses on signs that we are under too much stress and how to recognize our own stress reactions. Fourth lesson is called Coping with COVID-19. I'll move ahead again. There we go. Coping with COVID-19. What works and what doesn't? The focus is on ways of coping that may be helpful to you in considering your own coping plan. And these pages have a mind of their own, it looks like. I'm going to go back here. Lesson 5, being connected with other people is more important now than ever. This is really about social isolation. Several weeks ago, Tony and I did a webinar with Ruth Cologne-Wagner about this topic. This lesson, the focus is on social support, why it's important, especially now, and steps you can take to make sure that you have social support that you want. And finally, the 6th lesson is staying physically healthy during the COVID-19 crisis. The focus here is on having a healthy lifestyle generally, things to do to stay healthy during the crisis, and the connection between a healthy lifestyle and mental health recovery. So those are the 6 lessons. Now, with a little bit of technological good fortune, we're going to show you some of these. So this is the PDF of the lessons. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of it. Here's the table of contents, 6 lessons we just mentioned. Here's the lesson number. Now, here is an introduction to the individual. We're going to cover some of this material in a few minutes, but how to really engage somebody around this. First lesson, All these lessons are structured in the same way. Starts with the beginning. Here we talk about the lesson, why it's an important topic. And we have some important information, as you can see on your screen. Some basic information, not trivial, but not overwhelming either, just enough. And so we get some background here. We talk about symptoms. How does the COVID-19 spread? What can you do to protect yourself? What to do if you think you're sick? How to learn more about this topic, including a link to a website that can be helpful. And the next section is called Let's Get Personal. And here the person has a chance to take this information and figure out how it relates to their own situation. So we ask here, how are you currently learning about COVID-19? And how would you like to learn more in the future, starting today? Please check all the boxes that apply to you. And then we have different strategies here. And people say whether they're using the strategies now or whether they want to start using them. Some more strategies on the next page. Then there's an action step. The action step is the opportunity to think through what a next step might be. It's not exactly homework because it's not required, but it's something the person might choose to do. And here in this action step, as you can see, the person thinks through if there's a strategy that they'd like to start doing and how to do that. And then we end the main points about the lesson, a little conversation about that. Ask the person how they feel about what we've covered. And then we've added these affirmations. At the end of each lesson is an affirmation that a person might choose to say out loud, or they can develop their own affirmation related to the topic. That's the first lesson. I'll also show you quickly the second lesson. You can see this one is what is stress? Why is it important to understand? Same structure, beginning. Only here we now go back to the previous lesson and talk a little bit about what the person has learned from the previous lesson. And we introduce today's lesson. Important information, such as what is stress? Why is understanding stress important? Discussion points, another personal opportunity to make it personal. Here the person is checking off worries that they may be having currently. Another discussion point, and then the opportunity to create an action step. Finally, opportunity to look at part of the action step is really mapping out when the person's feeling more or less worried throughout the week. And we end with some summary and an affirmation. So I think people can see how these are laid out. And later on, if you have questions and answers, we'll be glad to take them. So those are the lessons themselves. So how do you introduce this? How do you engage somebody? Keep in mind that participation is entirely voluntary. So if the person's going to make an informed choice, the person should have some sense of what's involved and what he or she would be committing to. So you want to have some preliminary discussion. It might even be more than one discussion that helps the person to make an informed choice. Might include providing some information about the lessons, what's expected, how the lessons are structured. We want you to keep in mind that the lessons are designed to be used remotely. So much of the work for many now is remote work, but also, of course, to be used in person, individually, and also in groups. When you're using it remotely, some people might prefer to have a conversation, a discussion, rather than a formal lesson. That's absolutely okay. You want to be guided by what works for the person and what he or she prefers. And individuals should be provided with their own copies of these lessons if that's possible. If they have access to a computer, they can download them, or you can email these. This is really good for the individual to have the lesson in front of him or herself as you're going through it. And then we've listed some ways of engaging, some questions and points you might want to bring up. You're going to probably invent your own. But some questions might be, would you be interested in learning more about the COVID-19 crisis and how to cope with it? If you are, we have these 6 lessons that we can look at if you'd like. You can choose to do one of them, some of them, all of them, really up to you. and you can list them. With each lesson, you can tell the person, we provide you with some information, give you the opportunity to think about the importance of the information in your life, identify action steps that you can take, and ask for questions, and see if the person would like to begin and do any of this work. And you may very well develop your own questions or ways of engaging with the person. Okay, another polling question. Are you familiar with the ropes approach to organizing lessons, either individually or in a group? If this rings a bell for you, please let us know. We'll give you a minute or so to respond.
All right, I'll be closing it now. Give it a few seconds for the results to appear. All right. Paul, can you see the results on the right side of the screen?
I can't. So, Fung, if you can read them, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So we had just 7% say yes, and 47% said no.
So this is new stuff. And fortunately, we kind of anticipated that. So we're going to introduce this ropes approach to you, and Tony's going to actually go into quite a bit of detail in it in a few minutes. So what is ropes? It's a framework that's based on the principles of adult education, and Tony and I really borrowed it from the work of Dr. William Anthony, who was based at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation at Boston University. And this goes back to, we first started adapting this decades ago, really. ROPE stands for review, overview, presentation, exercise, and summary. And we designed these COVID-19 lessons with this framework, this ROPES, in mind. So we kind of walked through the lessons already, but just to kind of recap the organizational structure, they all start with a beginning. And it's a review of the previous lesson and an introduction to this lesson. There's important information, which gives you background information to describe the COVID-19 related topic and why it may be important. But we try to do this in a way that is just enough information, not overwhelming, but also not trivial. For a number of the lessons, there are discussion points, which are designed to increase the interaction and conversation, promote understanding and clarify meaning, and address concerns and questions. There's a section we're calling Let's Get Personal, which, as you saw in the examples just a few minutes ago, it's an opportunity to personalize the topic to a person's own experiences. Then there's the planning for the action step. If the person chooses to make a decision to continue learning or apply what they've learned to address their concerns. And finally, ending, a summary, and an affirmation, ending on a positive note. So that's how each of these lessons is organized. As we mentioned before, these lessons can be done individually. You can do them remotely with an online platform like Zoom, or you can do it by telephone. You can also, of course, do this face-to-face. It can be done as a formal lesson, can be done as an informal conversation or discussion. It's really up to the individual what they're most comfortable with. And individually, you can cover all 6 lessons, or you can cover a few, whatever the person really prefers. Now, Tony, I'm going to turn things over to you for the remainder of the slides here.
All right, thanks so much, Paul. A number of chat responses and questions came in, and one of them is, am I going to have access to the workbook, access to these lessons? And the answer is yes. And at the end, we'll share with you how you can access that, but it's immediately available to you so that you can take a closer look at each of the lessons and see which ones are really going to make some sense in light of what you're you're currently doing. So this really has to do with groups. Now, Paul, I don't think I'm in control of the slides.
Let's see.
But it's okay.
You got him, Tony.
Do I have them now? Okay, let's just see. All right. So
there you go.
You got him.
okay. So let me see. Yes. Can everybody see that? Benefits of groups?
Yep.
Okay. So, we don't know to what extent folks, one, were running groups before this COVID problem and are trying to continue providing services, in groups. We're not quite sure. We're going to be asking you a poll to get a better sense of that. But if you do it in groups or you do it with an individual client, in many ways, the process is the same as Paul explained. The reason why, Paul and I, we were in the clinical world for like really a long time, and we were running groups in day programs, probably 2-3 groups a week. I mean, it was just unbelievable in terms of sort of the group demands on the work that we experienced. And we also recognized that in our own training and also what was out there in the literature, there really wasn't that much on how do you use, an approach when there's a specific theme for people who have serious mental health problems or serious substance use issues. And the material out there didn't seem to really do it for us. So what we're sharing with you is what the literature on adult learning, what are some of the critical factors? It's very tough to educate people through a conversation. I think you recognize that, right? I certainly did. Then I was just doing therapy with clients, and I was trying to convey information, providing some education, doing it through just conversation and not having a systematic learning process. We felt it wasn't really getting us very far. So what this is really all about is creating a systematic way. If your goal is to educate your client, if your goal is to provide information so that the client can use that information to make decisions that will work for them, then this is a systematic way of doing it. These 6 lessons were specific to a particular challenge that people are facing today. So, there's a benefit to groups, and I don't have to necessarily go through that, but you can recognize, especially now, if you're able to create, if there's the technical capacity and it's practical for you to actually bring a number of your clients together to share and to learn from each other and with each other, and that you're guiding them through this learning process through the use of these lessons, that can be really, really powerful. But we also recognize that maybe that what's on both ends in terms of the technology that's required may make that difficult. But in the event that you can, we wanted to emphasize some of the advantages of group work. So here's a poll question that we want to raise. First of all, do you currently run one or more groups in which these topics would really be helpful? So just to let us know, do you run a group and will probably use one or more of these lessons? Do you run a group, but we're not going to really be focusing on COVID specific? The theme of the group is on different issues, let's say. C, I don't really run groups. I probably use these only in individual sessions. Or D, I'm really not sure if will use a structured lesson educational approach that you guys are talking about. So if you could please just think about that and honestly answer the question, that would be really helpful. Give you a moment. Okay, it takes just a little while. Some folks are just chatting their answer in. They may not see the poll, but for most of you, okay, Fung, how are we doing? Some people actually saying they may start okay. Mm-hmm. So what we have is a good number of folks are running a group. Wow, 143 folks who are actually continuing to run a group. and will likely use it. I run a group, but we will probably not focus on this. It's a smaller number, and that's perfectly fine, of course. There's a very large number that are going to be providing this in individual work, and a number of folks who are really not sure if they're going to be able to fold in this kind of systematic educational method as part of their work. Okay, but at least, you know, we're pleased that folks have gotten on and want to learn more. And some folks actually chatted in that they're now thinking about, even if they haven't run groups, they're thinking about running groups.
You know, Tony, I'm really impressed with the number of people who are running groups.
Yeah. It's not an easy thing to do these days. We really weren't quite sure if there would be hardly anyone who's able to do running groups. That's fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, so now you know groups are not for everyone. I think some people chatted in that my clients may not go for either group work or they just don't feel that comfortable. Well, this is how you need to determine it, whether or not a person would benefit most from a group is asking, you know, certain questions. Now, who likes groups? Well, folks who likes group, they tend to like sharing their feelings with others. So if you would ask a client, you like sharing your feeling with others, they say, yeah, I do. They're likely to value being in a group. When I first meet someone, I like to share things about myself. I think that working in a group will really help me. If I participate, I expect to feel quite a bit better. So that's the person's perception of when I'm with other people talking about important things, how comfortable I am. Some people will be in the affirmative, others will not. So the good thing about these lessons, it doesn't matter. You can do them in both groups and individual work. Okay. So you do need some ground rules, especially when you're running groups, and you do that in the very beginning. And it's important to just really ask folks, well, how should we be with each other here? How can we create an environment where people feel safe, feel comfortable, and also that they can really concentrate on the process, on learning, posting the ground rules. You also, you know, if you were meeting face to face, which we hope is not going to be in the too far distant future, where people commit themselves to, yeah, I'm going to commit myself to adhering to these ground rules, both for myself as well as ensuring that I don't interfere with the learning of others. And here are just some examples of some ground rules that you may want to apply. But it's best to really generate that with the people on the group. There's like 143 folks on this webinar right now who are running groups. And so one thing to think about when you're in your next group, one, have you already established those ground rules? If not, this would be a time to have that conversation and then really think about how we're going to best be with each other, especially during this virtual kind of like reality that we have. Okay, so, but you know, ground rules are not enough, right? When Paul and I were looking to develop the wellness self-management approach, and you'll see that in each of the lessons that we've developed, is you need a framework that promotes safety and trust. People need to be able to personalize it. Very hard sometimes in groups to ensure that each person in the group gets a chance to really personalize it, connect it in their own particular, you know, experience. It's got to be clear and has to make sense to everybody. You have to be able to stay on track, but the topic can't be so inflexible. And that's a message to all of you with these lessons is that, you know, we developed a certain format, but you know your clients best and you know how you need to modify it or change it and make some alterations that would suit the needs of the clients that you have. Focusing on empowering clients, and that's what this is all about. If you have information, if you understand that information, both around COVID-19, about your reactions to it, how to cope more effectively, how to ensure that you maintain your health during this time. When you have that information, you have power. If you don't have the information, you lose power. You lose a sense of having agency in your own life. Shared decision-making throughout the whole thing, as Paul mentioned. And having these materials that folks have in their possession, they can always go back and review it. So it isn't like, gee, I didn't get it when I met with my practitioner, my helper. I didn't get it, what we talked about. Here you also have a record of the information itself. Okay, and as Paul mentioned, being able to continue your learning. So now, Paul and I, when we used to do training, and those of you who may have seen us in person years ago, we like to kid around a little bit, right? We like to have a little fun whenever we're presenting something that we think is pretty serious. But at the same time, we don't take ourselves too seriously. So we had come up with a, well, it's not so famous, actually. Dr. Margulies, I would say this is not so famous, group format for conducting the group. So if you're going to introduce the lesson, both in a group or in individual, we think that this is the model we've developed. It's really very simply called the multiphasic, temporally sequential, tripartite group pedagogical process, but you guys can refer to it as really simply as the MPT, STB, GPP, model of group work, but also applicable in individual work as well. So my job, as Paul mentioned when he talked about ropes, is, we think a really good learning process, whether it's an individual tutorial or it's learning in a group format, really has a good beginning and end. Nothing fancier than that. Believe it or not, in many of the groups that Dr. Margulies and I ran or we supervised or sat in on, you would think, of course, a group has to have a beginning, middle, and end. But that's not always the case. Sometimes groups never even get off the beginning, or get stuck in the middle, or never really have an ending that feels like it was, you wrapped up a good learning experience. So that's about as fancy as we get. And in terms of the ropes, as Paul mentioned, let's go through it. So the review, whenever you're working with somebody in groups or individually, before you provide information, it can be very helpful to really review anything that you've done in the past to get a sense of whether there was continuity from the previous conversation, the previous learning. And it's also a way of orienting your client to what is this topic we're going to talk about. Any one of those 6 lessons that Paul presented, how do you introduce that? And so it's really designed to in a 5-step approach that really engages the person immediately. So step 1, review the important points from previous lessons. So last week we talked about information around the COVID-19 and stuff. What did you get from that? What was your takeaway? What do you remember from that learning experience? Reviewing if the person did any action step. Did they choose to apply what they learned previously, or to continue some of their learning, or they still have some questions about some of the previous work? So you're always building sort of a bridge from one lesson to the other lesson. The other is to review the participants' current knowledge of the topic. This is a really big one. What that really means is before you provide information, to assess what your client already knows. So you might ask your client, if you did the first lesson, Paul, does this make sense to you? Would you ask your client, saying, well, what do you already know about some of this COVID-19 situation that we're in? I'm not sure. I think Paul might be frozen.
That's exactly right, Tony. And we did that when we began today's webinar, when we were asking people about any experience they might have had knowing about wellness management or using wellness self-management. And we found that helpful just today to get an age of where people are at and how much detail to get into.
Right. Great. Thanks. Paul, can you just give me a time check? I don't have a watch in front of me, actually.
It's 2:40. It's 2:40, Tony.
And we're going to 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm going to go a little bit quicker on this. So reviewing the client's knowledge, why would this be important? So part of it is engaging them initially, and then an overview of what's going to happen. It just calms everybody down when they know, okay, we're going to start out with important information. We'll have a discussion. We'll do a personal worksheet. Let's get personal. We'll talk about the action steps, and then end with an affirmation. When you explain that to your client, it calms everybody down because they know what to expect. Okay, so I'm going to go through this a little more quickly. So the overview, as I just mentioned, here are some things that you can say. We're going to give you all of these PowerPoint slides that will be available to you. So you can go through it in a little more detail. We put a lot of text in this PowerPoint, because we also want you to use this as sort of a summary guide that gives you really step-by-step ways that you can begin the process of introducing a structured learning approach. So here are just some of the questions you can ask. Okay, then that's at the beginning of your group. The middle or beginning of your individual tutorial. In the middle of either a group or individual work, now you go into the lesson itself. Now you're going to go into actually the important information, let's get personal, discussion points. That's the bulk of it. But before you even get to the lesson, I think that's the point we want to say. Before you even get to the lesson, try to elicit whatever knowledge the person has or doesn't have about this topic, and also elicit the degree to which they think this is important. And then then the lesson, if they don't recognize why it's important, if they don't know very much about it, we say that's great, because now here's an opportunity for folks to learn a little bit more why this could be important in terms of their own overall health and well-being. So that's the middle. And then at the end of the course, here's some language that you can use. All right, we just give you, now you use whatever language is comfortable for you. These are, again, just some suggestions of how you would get that point across. So we're going from the beginning, which is really engagement and eliciting knowledge, going to the middle, which is now introducing the lesson. And then you also have the action step. This is the E in ropes. And the action step is simply giving a person an opportunity to think about how they would want to apply what they have learned in their lives. And that's something that's a challenge in all of our work, individual, group, is how do we ensure that the client takes the experience, the knowledge, the experience of having a session with us, a learning process. How do they think about, well, that's good for me to learn stuff, but what's really great is how I apply it to improve my life. And that's what this action step gives people a chance to do. And it's self-directed. We don't assign it. We don't expect it. We offer it. This is all about shared decision making, which means offering opportunities rather than directive activity. So here's some language that you can use. Again, you'll have these slides for you to review. Okay, and let's go to, the summary. All right. Okay, to end the group. Now, I have to tell you honestly, and Paul, I don't know, did you do this as well? I would say 90% of my groups ended with, see you next week. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I didn't really think about how I would try to wrap up and engage my clients in wrapping up the experience. This is true in individual work as well. And an ending or a summary isn't like, okay, you guys were good, you did great today, I hope it was helpful, see you next week.
I think you're right. I think oftentimes, for many of us, we begin the group in the middle and we end the group in the middle and don't really properly start it or bring it to a conclusion. This structure really gives people some guidance around how to do that.
Yeah, I almost, because I'm Sicilian, I think of this as having a good meal. Like there's a whole good meal to this. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And we want the learning experience to feel that way too, that we're able to get through this process. And the summary is basically getting feedback from your client, or whether it's a number of group members, getting feedback on, was this helpful? Did this really focus on what's important to you? Was this clear? Did we go too fast? Did we go too slow? And did you guys feel comfortable? Were you able to share what you wanted to share, or did you have to hold back? It's part of that feedback-informed treatment, which is a whole other area. But ending on that note, and then also getting everyone to reflect on what went well. And very importantly, the practitioner keeping tabs, keeping a record in their mind of every positive observation during that learning. Anything that the client or clients in the group did that was really promoting the learning process and reinforcing that. That is so powerful. Constant, reinforcing what went very well in this learning experience. And that could the person volunteer to read, the person shared their thoughts. If it's in a group, the person asked how other people were feeling. There's so many things that are very positive. The one thing about using reinforcement, positive feedback, is that it strengthens the experience of everybody, it strengthens the learning, and it creates a very positive atmosphere. Here are just some examples of some of the language you use, individual or in group. What was the main point you took from today's lesson? Was it helpful to you? How do you feel about it? Was the topic interesting? Those sorts of things. And then you, of course, as the practitioner, sharing your thoughts about the meeting. Okay, so I'm going to end up, Paul, let me do a time check.
Okay, it's 2:45 right now, Tony.
Great. So now is really, if you want to say a little bit, Paul, of how folks can get a hold.
Exactly right. So what we want people to know is these 6 lessons are available for you at no cost right now. You can download them from that first link, which is the CPI website, and you'll also be able to download them from the CTAC website. So they'll be there for you, and you can download them. You can begin working with these really immediately, and we encourage you to do so.
Terrific. And Paul, you were mentioning also that folks might have seemed to express some interest in learning more about the original wellness self-management, which is accessible to people free of charge as well. Is that accurate?
Exactly right. On the CPI website, we have a storefront on our landing page, and it says basically CPI products. And so you can go in there and you can download the Wellness Self-Management Workbook, as well as the Wellness Self-Management Plus Workbook, which is a separate workbook focusing both on mental health as well as substance use issues. You can download them free of charge. If you'd like hard copies, we sell them at cost. I think it's about $18 or $20 a paper copy. But you can go in there today and download these resources at no cost to you whatsoever.
So Paul, if I were to go into practiceinnovations.org, right? If I Google that, practiceinnovations.org, then whatever pops up, I'll be able to follow it.
Correct.
Getting
Correct, Tony. On that landing page, there'll be a tab there for CPI products, and just follow the directions and it'll get you there.
Terrific. And there's also some initial training on there as well, like a little module that kind of goes through some of the ropes process as well. Is that accurate?
There are quite a few resources there. Absolutely.
Terrific.
Absolutely.
Terrific.
So yeah, we encourage people to go there and check these out and download these resources. Yeah.
Terrific. So let's just open it up, Paul, for any questions, comments that folks want to chime in with. Oh, so some like a younger population, we get that a lot. Now we try with the language, Paul, to try to make it like 7th grade, 8th, but 7th grade, 8th grade is still pretty high in some ways. And some are asking, see if I'm working with teenagers, would this be applicable? Now, I think there is, but the practitioner might need to make some changes in the language a little bit, or just recognize that maybe I'll need to explain some of the language a little bit more to a younger group. But the idea that young people, like teenagers, also can benefit a great deal from learning more about the COVID-19, learning more about stress, learning more about coping, learning more about how to stay physically healthy. What are your thoughts on that, Paul?
No, I agree with you completely. And I think as with all these kinds of resources, you want to adapt it to the person in front of you or the people in front of you. But can young people, high school people, benefit from this? Absolutely.
Great. Fung, are you still there with us? And I'm wondering if you could see some of the questions.
Yeah.
Because you have the whole list of questions.
Yeah.
Anything that's popping up or there's a trend in
Yeah.
types of similar questions that people are asking?
So we have a question that says, would you recommend this being able to be utilized with staff as a supervisory tool?
Oh, well, that one is that's a very interesting. We hadn't, Paul, you and I never even thought about that.
You're right.
I really never even thought about that. You know, I'm thinking now. I'm not sure if it would be as in a structure, because I'm trying to think of myself when I was a supervisor. We're supervising Paul. Paul and I have been supervisors of clinicians a long time. How I might introduce it. I think in some ways, I know for me, I think I would want to read those lessons. Part of it was just to have information for me, so that when I was working with my supervisees, I would be really attentive to some of those issues, and it could guide some of my conversations. And maybe some folks might be open to actually going through this as a structured educational supervisory process. What do you think about that, Dr. Martin?
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. I think you're right about that. I think the first thing is for the agency to decide whether they want to be providing the service. And if so, if I were a supervisor, you know, I'd want to be sitting with the folks that work with me, reviewing the lessons, these 6 lessons, talking about their importance and how they might be applicable to the folks that we serve. And it can certainly be folded into the supervisory process. And then find out how it's going. You know, part of supervision is, you know, obviously trying to get a sense of the impact of it all. So learning how people are using it and whether they're finding it user-friendly. And those things, sure.
Yeah, okay, I think Paul's connection.
Can you hear me?
Paul, you got to go in it. I think the main point you were making. Yeah, I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Okay. So really, yeah, the point is I'd want to sit with my supervisees, review the material, and then as soon as they begin to use it, learn from them how it's all going. So we could improve how we provide these 6 lessons.
Yeah, no, that's terrific, Paul. And you know, I have to say, Dr. Margulies is the one who got this all started. And based on what I'm seeing come in as these responses, Paul, I think you had a really terrific idea, because folks seem to really want to have some tools that they can use. You know, when we were working on these, there was the area of like stress, and I was really thinking about what would be the list of worries that people could have. I wouldn't have really thought about that outside of trying to create this lesson. And I think both in whether it's supervisory or it's part of working with a client is to ensure that you really give them and identify the numerous worries that people would have. And I think that is an important process, has implications for both working with clients as well as working with supervisees. So thanks very much for that question.
Yeah, and Tony, can you hear me okay?
You're kind of breaking up a little bit, Dr. Margaret.
Okay, because the one thing I want to mention, if folks can hear me, is as you begin to use these lessons, we'd love to hear from you to learn how it's going.
Well, one of the things, we do have everybody's email. And so maybe down the road, we might just want to send out an email blast and just getting a sense of, were you able to use it? Was it helpful to you in any way? Did you use it in groups? Were you able to use it with individuals? What was the response of your clients? You know, all those sorts of things would be really very useful. So you may be looking out for an email down the road. Well, we won't overwhelm you with it. We know you guys are getting tons of things already. Okay. So any other questions?
Yeah. Do the facilitators have any tips for facilitating a WSM via virtual groups?
Yeah. Well, you know, we actually, do we have an archived webinar on running virtual groups, Fung?
Yes, we have a virtual group therapy webinar, and it's listed on the CTAC page under the COVID resources. We can send that out.
Yeah. So I would recommend going to CTAC website, and you'll see a list of archived webinars, and one of them is on running a virtual group, and it goes through the technical aspects of it, as well as the format, as well as the communication. So I would recommend that. I think I can't give you a good answer, I think, in just a minute or so, but that would be a helpful webinar source for you.
Great, thank you. And we have another question regarding the credentials someone would need to utilize it. So what credentials should a facilitator have to use this? I am a credentialed family peer advocate, but I do not have a degree. Is this something I could use with my family support groups, or would I need to have a clinician on board?
No, we intentionally designed this to be as straightforward, where the lessons themselves provide a lot of guidance. So we very much thought about that this should be accessible to all levels of staff who are in a helping role. And that includes all peer advocates and peer specialists. If your organization, has given you, right, so I won't say the privilege, but that you're expected to work with your clients to help them to deal with the stresses associated with the current situation, or just the challenges of mental illness, substance use, then you are free to use these resources as well.
Tony, I would add to that if an agency has several people using these lessons, it would be a wonderful opportunity for people to share with one another what they're learning and to learn from each other.
Yep. Very good point. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Fung, any other questions?
Thank you. One more. Can you share any thoughts you have on addressing management of physical chronic conditions, as this is a big risk factor for having serious medical consequences of COVID-19?
Yeah, Paul, do you have thoughts on that? You were working on the lesson around staying physically healthy.
Yeah, so within that lesson, there are a number of tips, and there are ones that, we all hear, very often, especially, on the media and such, around how to keep yourself healthy, around, personal distancing, around good hygiene and hand washing and that sort of thing, and being aware of what our own risk factors are and therefore our own risk tolerance. And for some of us with more risk factors, we might be less tolerant of risk than others might be. And that's a reasonable way to approach it.
Yeah, the issue of medical issues, I think that's that particular lesson gets that conversation going.
Yep.
And helps them focus, on what is our time check at this point?
We're just about wrapping up. We have one more minute.
Okay.
So thank you everyone for all of your questions. We will be posting this recording and the slides, as well as the workbooks and additional resources onto the website. And also, if you registered or attended this webinar, we have your email and we will send it out to you. I know there were a lot of technical difficulties today, so apologies for that. On the screen, you should be able to see the upcoming CTAC events. We have part 2 of a family treatment webinar next week, as well as education during COVID-19 to protect students' rights on next Friday, as well as another kinship care webinar. Thank you, Paul and Tony, so much for presenting this today. And if you have any questions, please contact us at ctac.info@nyu.edu and let us know what topics would be beneficial for you so we can put out more of those for you. And when you close the screen, you will a calculator will pop up. If you could take a few seconds and fill that out, that'd be really great. And have a great rest of your day, everyone. Please stay safe. Thank you, Paul and Tony, again.
Everybody.
Thank you for joining us, folks. Stay well.